endured loneliness, judgment, poverty, and endless uncertainty. And now, progress was coming for the last quiet corner of her world, ready to erase it completely. That afternoon, a stranger walked into her bookstore. A man with tired eyes, a worn leather journal tucked under his arm, and a lost look in his gaze that mirrored her own broken hopelessness. He would change everything. Not with grand gestures, dramatic speeches, or magical miracles. Simply with stories. With listening. With reminding her that the bookstore was never just walls and books, it was the people it held, the lives it touched, the hope it preserved. This is the story of the last street bookstore in Portland, the story of how a dying dream found new life, how broken people healed each other, how slow kindness defeated fast progress, and how the written word never truly dies, it just waits patiently for someone to turn the page again. Chapter 1: The Rent Letter and the Empty Shelves. The rain in Portland did not fall in sharp, sudden bursts like the storms in Texas or Florida. It drifted. It hovered. It wrapped the entire city in a soft gray blanket that muted every color, dulled every sound, and stretched every quiet moment into something longer, slower, more contemplative. October rain was the worst of it, cold, persistent, unrelenting, clinging to clothing, windows and rooftops from dawn till dusk, turning ordinary city days into endless muted melancholy. Clara Bennett spent every October morning the same way, unlocking the front door of Pine and Page Books at exactly 9 a.m., flipping the wooden open sign to face the street, brushing rainwater off the front bench, and stepping inside to breathe in the familiar comforting air of her bookstore. The shop was small, compact, and infinitely warm. The floors were original dark hardwood, scuffed and worn from decades of customer footsteps, each scratch and mark holding a silent memory. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with solid cedar bookshelves, stained deep brown by time, packed tight with thousands of books of every genre, era, and style. Classic literature, modern literary fiction, quiet poetry collections, vintage memoirs, travel essays, gentle children's stories, forgotten local history books, and rare signed copies from regional authors. There were no plastic decorations, no bright neon signs, no trendy merchandise displays, no loud music. The only decor was dried lavender bundles hanging beside the window, vintage reading lamps on every shelf aisle, a small wooden reading nook with 2 plush armchairs and a knit throw blanket, and a single framed black and white photo of her grandmother standing in the same storefront in 1987, young and bright-eyed, holding her first stack of inventory books. The shop had 2 narrow aisles, a small wooden checkout counter tucked in the back right corner, a vintage cash register that still worked manually, and a tiny water station with free tea and hot water for anyone who stayed to read. It was simple, old-fashioned, unpolished, and infinitely perfect in Clara's eyes. On most mornings, the shop stayed empty for hours. Tourists would glance in, see no trendy souvenirs, no cheap novelty items, no photo-worthy backdrops, and walk right back out. Young locals would pass by, glance at the old books, and keep walking toward the fast food shops and entertainment venues. Only a handful of regular loyal customers visited consistently, a retired high school teacher who read 1 poetry book per week, an elderly veteran who loved war memoirs and local history, a freelance illustrator who came to sketch in the reading nook, and a few quiet college students who preferred printed books to digital screens. It was never busy, never crowded, never profitable. But it was steady. It was alive. Or it had been, until the letter arrived. Clara locked the front door behind her, flipped on the warm overhead lamps, and hung her damp gray raincoat on the wooden hook beside the entrance. She brushed a strand of loose hair from her face, adjusted her thin wire-rimmed glasses, and walked toward the mailbox mounted on the inner wall beside the counter. She usually checked mail last, after finishing her morning shelf dusting and book straightening routine, but something pulled her toward it that morning, a quiet premonition of incoming bad news. Inside the small wooden mailbox, beneath a few junk flyers and a local newspaper, sat a crisp white envelope with the block logo of Northwest Urban Property Management printed in the top left corner. Clara's fingers froze the second she saw it. She knew exactly what it was. She had been waiting for it, dreading it, anticipating it for over a year. The property management company had been buying up all the old street-front storefronts on 5th and Pine for years, systematically replacing every small independent business with high-revenue chain stores. Pine and Page Books was the last holdout, the only unprofitable, old-fashioned shop left on the entire profitable commercial block. They had been patient. They had waited for her to fail naturally. When she refused to close, they chose force. Clara slowly tore open the envelope, her hand steady despite the tight knot forming in her chest. She pulled out the single sheet of printed paper, unfolded it, and read the cold, formal words line by line, her eyes scanning every sentence without skipping a single detail. Effective January 1st, the base monthly rent for 412 Fifth and Pine Street will be increased by 70%. Failure to submit full monthly payment by the 1st of each month will result in immediate lease termination and mandatory commercial eviction. All existing storefronts on this block are scheduled for interior demolition and commercial renovation in the new year to align with modern district branding guidelines. No exceptions. No negotiations. No extensions. 70%. Clara did the quick math in her head, her stomach dropping sharply. Her current rent already consumed nearly 80% of her monthly bookstore revenue. A 70% increase would more than double her monthly cost. Even if she sold every single book in the shop, even if every regular customer doubled their purchases, even if she worked 7 days a week without rest, she could never afford it. It was mathematically impossible. They were not giving her a chance to survive. They were politely, legally, officially telling her to close. She set the letter down on the wooden counter, her fingers brushing the smooth cold paper, and stared out the fogged front window at the rainy street outside. A group of teenagers walked past, heads tilted down at their phones, completely unaware of the quiet crisis unfolding inside the little bookstore beside them. A delivery truck rumbled by, splashing rainwater on the sidewalk. A barista from the neighboring burger shop stepped outside for a smoke break, glancing briefly at the bookstore before looking away, indifferent. No one cared. No one noticed. No one would miss this place when it was gone. For 7 years, Clara had told herself that persistence mattered. That quiet goodness mattered. That keeping the shop open, even for a handful of people, was worth every sacrifice. She had believed that some things were more important than profit, more important than progress, more important than speed and efficiency. Now she wondered if she had been foolish all along. She walked slowly through the bookstore aisles, her fingers brushing the worn book spines as she passed each shelf. She traced the faded gold lettering on classic novel titles, felt the rough texture of aged paperback covers, smiled faintly at the handwritten margin notes left by decades of readers before her. Every book in this shop had a story beyond its printed words. Every shelf held memories, moments, quiet joys and sorrows from generations of Portland readers. Her grandmother had always said that books were time machines. They carried the thoughts, feelings, hopes and fears of people from the past and delivered them straight to the present. Closing the bookstore would not just erase a business. it would erase a living archive of quiet human stories that no digital platform could ever preserve. By 10 a.m. the first regular customer arrived. Mr. Henderson, 78 years old, retired high school English teacher, thin and silver-haired, always wearing a well-pressed flannel shirt and wire-rimmed glasses identical to Clara's. He visited every single morning without fail, rain or shine, to borrow one poetry book and sit in the reading nook for an hour before heading home to make lunch for his wife. He pushed open the front door, the small brass bell jingling softly, and smiled warmly at Clara as he always did. "Good morning, Clara. Rain's coming down harder today than yesterday." Clara forced a gentle smile, hiding the heavy weight in her chest. "It always does in October. Your usual spot's open." Mr. Henderson paused, studying her face with the sharp observant eye of a lifelong literature teacher. He could read tone, expression, and hidden emotion better than anyone Clara knew. "You look tired today. Trouble sleeping?" "Just a little overwhelmed," Clara answered honestly, choosing not to elaborate. She never burdened her regulars with her struggles. This shop was their safe space too, and she refused to cloud it with her own despair. Mr. Henderson nodded slowly, not pushing for details. He walked to the poetry shelf, selected a worn copy of Robert Frost's collected poems, and settled into the left armchair in the reading nook, pulling the knit throw blanket over his legs. He opened the book slowly, his movements deliberate and calm, and sank into quiet reading. Watching him, Clara's chest ached sharply. When the bookstore closed, where would he go? Where would he find a quiet, warm space to read poetry every morning? Where would the other regulars go? The veteran who came for history books to feel connected to his fallen comrades. The freelance illustrator who sketched quietly in the corner to escape her noisy apartment. The college students who studied here to avoid dorm chaos. progress did not just erase buildings. It erased small, gentle human lives and routines. It erased peace. For the next 2 hours, Clara went through her usual motions mechanically. She dusted shelves, straightened misaligned books, restocked the tea station, updated her handwritten inventory log, and greeted the rare passing customer with automatic politeness. Her body moved through the familiar routine, but her mind was stuck on the rent letter, on the inevitable closing, on the end of everything she had spent 7 years protecting. At exactly 12:30 p.m. the bell jingled again. Clara looked up from her inventory notebook, expecting a tourist or a regular. Instead, she saw a man she had never seen before. He was roughly 35 years old, tall and lean, with dark brown hair slightly tousled from the rain, sharp but tired hazel eyes, and a quiet, worn demeanor that suggested he had been walking through the city for hours. He wore a simple dark gray jacket, dark jeans, and scuffed leather boots, and he held a thick black leather journal tucked tightly under his left arm, clutching it like a precious possession. He did not look like a tourist. He had no camera, no map, no shopping bag. He did not look like a local college student or office worker. He looked like someone lost in the city, searching for something he could not name. He paused just inside the doorway, glancing slowly around the entire bookstore, his gaze sweeping over the shelves, the reading nook, the warm lamps, the quiet reading Mr. Henderson, and finally settling on Clara behind the counter. There was no rush in his eyes. No impatience, no boredom, no expectation of quick entertainment. Just quiet, genuine curiosity, like he had stumbled onto something rare and precious in the middle of a noisy world. "Sorry to intrude," he said, his voice low, calm, and polite, with a soft neutral American accent. I've been walking around downtown for hours trying to find a bookstore that still feels like a bookstore. I thought they were all gone. Clara's tense shoulders relaxed slightly, a faint genuine smile tugging at her lips. We're the last one left on this street. Probably the last one in the whole downtown district. The man stepped further inside, letting the door close softly behind him, blocking out the rain and city noise. He breathed in deeply, taking in the scent of old paper and cedar, and let out a quiet relieved sigh. I'm Elias Voss, he said, walking toward the counter and extending a hand gently. I just moved back to Portland after being away for 8 years. Clara Bennett, she replied, shaking his hand briefly. His grip was firm but gentle, warm despite the cold rain outside. I own this place. Elias glanced around again, his eyes lingering on the framed photo of Clara's grandmother, on the lavender bundles, on the overflowing bookshelves. It's beautiful. I grew up coming here as a kid. My mom used to bring me every weekend. I forgot it was still standing. Clara's curiosity sparked. Very few new customers had personal history with the bookstore. Most people under 40 had never stepped foot inside. You haven't been back in 8 years. 8 years exactly, Elias confirmed, his tone softening with quiet nostalgia. I left Portland after college, worked as a traveling journalist across the country, writing human interest stories for independent magazines. I just moved back last week. Everything's changed. Every place I grew up with is gone or renovated beyond recognition. This is the only thing that looks exactly the same. His words struck Clara deeply. She knew that feeling intimately, the grief of returning home to find all your memories erased by progress. Portland changes fast, she said quietly. Too fast. Elias nodded in agreement, his gaze drifting down to the rent letter still lying open on the counter, the bold words visible from where he stood. His expression shifted slightly, from warm nostalgia to quiet understanding. "You're getting pushed out too, aren't you?" he asked gently. No judgment, no assumption, just quiet recognition. Clara hesitated for a moment, then nodded honestly. "They're raising the rent 70% in January. I can't afford it. I'm closing soon." There was no dramatic reaction from Elias. No gasp, no shock, no empty platitudes of "that's terrible" or "I'm so sorry." He simply looked at the bookstore, at the quiet reading nook, at the thousands of books lining the walls, and nodded slowly, his eyes filled with sincere sorrow. "I figured it was coming," he said softly. "They erase the quiet places first. The ones that don't make enough noise or enough money." In that single sentence, he understood everything. Understood exactly what Clara had been fighting for 7 years. Understood the loss, the grief, the quiet injustice of it all. For the first time since receiving the letter, Clara did not feel alone. Chapter 2: The Journal and the Unwritten Stories. Elias did not rush to browse the shelves. He did not ask for bestsellers or popular recommendations. He simply stood at the counter for a long moment, absorbing the quiet atmosphere of the bookstore, letting the stillness settle over him like a blanket after years of constant travel noise. Clara watched him quietly, her initial wariness fading into calm curiosity. Most strangers who entered the shop were either in a hurry, bored, or confused by the lack of modern amenities. Elias was different. He moved slowly, intentionally, like he respected the space, like he understood that bookstores were not just retail locations but sanctuaries for tired souls. "I spent 8 years chasing big stories," Elias said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. his voice low enough not to disturb Mr. Henderson's reading. Cross-country road trips, small-town crises, community struggles, human tragedy and human hope. I wrote hundreds of published articles, covered dozens of major events, interviewed thousands of people. And the whole time, I missed the small stories. The quiet ones that happen in places exactly like this. Clara leaned gently against the counter, interested. What kind of small stories? The ones no one publishes, Elias explained, tapping the black leather journal tucked under his arm. The stories of ordinary people fighting to keep their small businesses alive. Fighting to hold on to their hometowns. Fighting to preserve quiet goodness in a world that only values speed and profit. Those stories don't go viral. They don't get clicks. They don't make headlines. But they're the most human stories there are. Clara smiled faintly, a bittersweet expression. No one cares about those stories anymore. I care, Elias said firmly. That's why I moved back. I quit my national magazine job. I'm starting an independent local storytelling project. No algorithms, no clickbait, no trending topics. Just honest, unfiltered stories about Portland's disappearing small businesses and the people who fight to keep them alive. Clara's heart skipped a small, hopeful beat, though she immediately pushed it down, refusing to let herself hope. Hope had only ever led to disappointment in the past 7 years. What exactly would that mean for me? I want to write your story, Elias said simply. Not a sad obituary for a dying bookstore. A living story about 7 years of stubborn, quiet resistance. About why this place matters, why it's worth saving, why a city needs quiet, slow spaces just as much as fast, profitable ones. I want to publish it locally, share it with the community, and let people know what they're about to lose. Clara hesitated, her mind racing. She had never sought publicity, never asked for community support, never tried to rally attention for her struggles. She had always believed the bookstore's value spoke for itself, that kindness and persistence did not need crowds or recognition. But after 7 years of silent fighting, after receiving the final rent notice, she was forced to admit the truth. No one knew what they were losing because no one had ever been told. People walked past this bookstore every single day without seeing it. They saw an old dusty shop, a useless relic, a business failing to keep up with the times. They did not see the community heart beating inside, did not see the countless quiet lives it had touched, the lonely hours it had comforted, the peace it had preserved. Maybe someone needed to tell them. I don't want pity, Clara said firmly, setting clear boundaries. I don't want people feeling sorry for me. I don't want a viral sad story. I just want people to understand why this place exists. Elias nodded immediately, respecting her boundaries completely. No pity. No tragedy bait. Just truth. I write human stories, not sad stories. I'll write about your grandmother's legacy, your 7 years of work, the regular customers who rely on this space, the quiet magic of slow reading in a fast world. I'll let the community decide what it means to them. His sincerity was undeniable. There was no agenda in his eyes, no desire for clout, no self-serving motive. He simply loved small stories, loved community, loved the quiet disappearing parts of American life that modern culture ignored. Okay, Clara agreed finally. You can write it, but only on one condition. You have to spend time here. Not just interview me for an hour and leave. You have to sit in the quiet. Watch the customers. See the place alive, not just hear me describe it. Elias smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his tired eyes. "That's exactly what I want. I've been looking for a quiet place to settle down and write all week. Your bookstore is perfect." For the rest of the afternoon, Elias stayed in the bookstore. He chose a small wooden table in the far corner, pulled out his leather journal and a vintage fountain pen, and began to write quietly. No phone, no laptop, no digital distractions. He wrote in longhand, slow and deliberate, just like the bookstore's rhythm. He did not interrupt Clara's work, did not ask constant questions, did not demand attention. He simply existed in the space, observing silently, absorbing the atmosphere, watching the small daily moments that made the bookstore alive. He watched Mr. Henderson finish his poetry book, return it carefully to its shelf, and leave with a quiet, satisfied nod. He watched the freelance illustrator arrive at 2 p.m., set up her sketchbook in the reading nook, and spend 3 hours drawing the bookstore's window view in complete silence. He watched a tired single mother stop by after picking up her child from school, purchase a cheap children's picture book, and relax for 5 precious minutes of quiet before returning to her busy, chaotic life. He saw everything no digital article could ever capture. The small, sacred, unrecorded moments that made the bookstore irreplaceable. As the afternoon turned to evening and the rain continued to drift outside, Clara found herself talking to Elias in small, gentle increments. She told him about her grandmother's 37 years of running the shop, about how Eloise had started the business after returning from volunteering overseas, wanting to create a space of peace for a community recovering from stress and division. She told him about growing up helping her grandmother dust shelves, fold receipts, recommend books to customers, and listen to strangers' stories. She told him about the 7 years since her grandmother passed, the endless rent struggles, the disappearing regulars, the judgment from friends and family, the quiet loneliness of devoting your entire life to a dying dream. She did not sugarcoat anything, did not soften the hard parts. She told him about the nights she could barely pay rent, the mornings she wanted to quit, the days she felt completely hopeless and alone. She told him about the guilt she felt for choosing a bookstore over a stable career, over a normal social life, over the future everyone expected her to have. Elias listened without interruption, without judgment, without empty reassurance. He simply wrote quietly in his journal, capturing her words, her tone, her quiet strength, every small detail of her story. When Clara finished speaking, the sky outside had turned dark gray, evening falling over the rainy city, street lights flickering on one by one through the fog. "You know what strikes me most?" Elias said finally, closing his journal halfway, his voice thoughtful. Most people define success by growth, profit, expansion, speed. You've defined success by preservation. You spent 7 years preserving peace, preserving stories, preserving a community home. That's not failure. That's courage most people will never have. Clara's eyes stung with unexpected tears. No one had ever put it that way before. No one had ever recognized her persistence as courage. Everyone else saw only stagnation, loss, failure. Elias saw sacrifice and heart. "I'm just trying to keep a promise," she whispered. "Promises are the oldest, most important stories we have," Elias replied. "They deserve to be told." That night, after closing the shop at 8 p.m., after locking the doors and turning off the lamps, Clara walked home to her tiny studio apartment above a nearby laundromat, her heart lighter than it had been in months. She still knew the odds were stacked against her. She still knew the rent increase was almost certainly a death sentence for her bookstore. But for the first time since receiving the letter, She did not feel like she was fighting alone. Someone was finally listening. Someone was finally going to tell the world her bookstore's true story. What she did not yet know was that Elias's story would do more than inform the community. It would awaken it, it would stir hundreds of quiet, hidden people who loved the bookstore, who had missed it, who had taken it for granted, and who were finally ready to fight to save it. The quiet revolution of Pine and Page Books had only just begun. Chapter 3: The Community That Forgot It Cared. Elias spent the entire next week immersed in the bookstore's daily life. He arrived every morning at opening time, stayed through the entire day, and left only when Clara locked up in the evening. He did not just interview her. He lived the bookstore's rhythm. He sipped the free chamomile tea, chatted gently with regular customers, observed every small interaction, noted every quiet moment of peace and connection that happened within the shop's walls. He interviewed Mr. Henderson, who teared up while talking about how the bookstore had gotten him through his wife's cancer treatment years prior, how reading poetry in the quiet nook had been the only calm space in his chaotic, stressful days. He interviewed the freelance illustrator, who explained that the bookstore was the only place she could escape her severe anxiety and create art freely. He interviewed the elderly veteran, who shared how local history books from the shop had helped him process his wartime trauma and feel connected to his community again. Every single regular customer had a unique, intimate, life-changing story tied to Pine and Page Books. Stories no one had ever heard. Stories no one had ever bothered to ask for. By the end of the week, Elias had written nearly 10,000 words of raw, honest, unpolished story content. He did not rush to publish. He refined slowly, adjusted phrasing, wove every personal anecdote together into a cohesive narrative that centered one core truth: small local businesses are not just businesses, they are community lifelines. On the following Friday evening, He published the full feature story on his independent community story